Well, welcome to the program, Janet Smith. Hi, Janet. How are you today?
I'm okay, thanks.
I think that this is important enough. Let me call Janet. And sure enough, like within 5 minutes now, we're on the phone talking, and we're doing this interview. So has it just been kind of a crazy few days?
Yeah, I've tried not to be glued to my media, but I find that every time I do get on, it's just, you lead, as you said, one link leads to another, leads to another. There's been some excellent writing, excellent things that people have put up. And then there are, as you say, just a lot of heartbreak being expressed, a lot of heartbreak and confusion, distress. And this isn't all just people who are devoted to the TLM. There's a lot of people who understand the importance of this liturgy to the church, even if it's not something that they are drawn to. And so there's a lot of people that are. In my Twitter feed, I'd say 2 out of 3 tweets are about the TLM right now.
So what we're talking about, this is Professor Janet Smith I'm talking with today on Sound Insight. She's referring to the traditional Latin Mass. Folks, as you listen to this, you know, as you've heard Janet and me talk about this when I've interviewed her, as well as the many times that Carrie and I have talked about the power of the traditional Latin Mass in our own lives. Well, on Friday, there was a document that came out called Traditionis, Custodes, by Pope Francis. And this document had to do with a new type of restrictions associated with priests and parishes where the extraordinary form of the Mass was being celebrated. And so what Janet's referring to is the way in which this document has led to like some intense reactions on, can we call it both sides, on both sides of the aisle and the both pews, those who are have a deep sense of devotion and love for the traditional Latin Mass, and for those that are, and so they're horrified and a bit afraid. What does this mean? And then you have the folks who are on the Novus Ordo side, the new Mass, what most of us listening here are still accustomed to doing only, or maybe most frequently, and are listening to the way in which the adherents to the traditional Latin Mass are divisive, are doubting the value of the Second Vatican Council, things like this that are being made as claims. How's that for a summary, Janet? How would you kind of characterize sort of what was said, and then sort of what's the aftermath, and how should we kind of get some balance and kind of not lose a sense of a balance around what's actually happening?
Why is balance so important, Tom? I think we want a sober, honest judgment. I want us to have the proper hope in the Lord and what He does through us and for us. But it seems to me it's an incredible blow to the faith of so many, not faith in the sense of how we believe, but how we worship, which is no insignificant thing. So many people, at least on the threads that I have on Facebook, seem to think, well, as long as the Eucharist is valid, that's enough, and you shouldn't really want anything more. And you want to say, I don't see the church has ever said that. And it doesn't seem, that in Scripture, the Old Testament particularly, the way that we worship God is very important. And there's an argument to be made to say that we're here on this earth to worship the Lord. And that's what we're here to do. And of course, since we want to do it in the most beautiful way possible, in the most faithful way possible, then people say, you're dissing the Novus Ordo. And I'm saying, well, whenever you have two things that are purported to be the same, you have all these contests all the time. My mother's apple pie versus your mother's apple pie. One of them's going to be better than the other. You don't want to say, I'm not trying to put your mother's apple pie down. I'm just saying one is better than the other. And but that's neither here nor there in a certain sense. This is the Mass of the Church. It's been the Mass of the Church since its very earliest days. It's not identical but further stretch of the imagination. But as those who write about it and historically have studied it, it's in, organic continuity with the very earliest modes of worship in the church. A very truly organic continuity. Yes, it's been developed, and yes, it's been beautifully developed. Things have been added. I don't doubt that it will be tweaked forever in certain respects. But it's something that every Catholic everywhere up until 1970, worshipped. And why that could ever be taken away from us just doesn't make sense. It just when Benedict gave it back to us and said it should have been abrogated. It can never be abrogated. Everybody was, not everybody, but anybody who had any idea of the importance of the Mass was so relieved. And that was such a unifying act. It brought so many people back into their churches and back into their parishes. My parish has 3 or 4 Novus Ordo Masses every Sunday and 1 traditional Latin Mass. It's packed. It's absolutely packed. That's brought people into the church. And it's not divisive, it's unifying. We all worship in the same space. This is the church of all of us. It's not as if we're off at one church and they're off at another church. And so many people go back and forth. Many people have no problem. 1 week doing the Novus Ordo, and next week doing the TLM. So, I think you portrayed it correctly, though. I don't know that many people fully realize how deeply, deeply devastating this is for people who had finally had some consolation in the last couple of years in respect to the liturgy. I know that the Novus Ordo can be said reverently. In fact, I live in an area now where that is normally the case. There's almost never anything that would make you just want to scream. But I'm 71 years old. I've known the Novus Ordo for, added up, 55 years. Much of it has been absolutely horrible. When I taught at Notre Dame for 9 years, and you never knew what was going to be done at the liturgy. You never knew if there was going to be none standing by the priest concelebrating. You never knew if you were going to be asked to come up and stand around the altar. You just never knew. Luckily, I think those days are behind us. But so people don't know what it's been like for those of us who lived during Vatican II and have lived since then till now, and what a relief Benedict's permission. And it wasn't even a permission. It was just acknowledging that it never should have been unpermitted. And people say, well, priests everybody has to get permission to say the Mass. I say, no, it's default that a priest can say the Novus Ordo. And all Benedict was saying is it's default that priests should be able to say the traditional Latin Mass. It's not something you should need permission for. It's the Mass of the Church.
Well, and I'm talking with Janet Smith today about this Motu Proprio, about the new restrictions being placed around the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass, and what are we to make of it? And Janet, when you mentioned Pope Benedict's Motu Proprio, the Summorum Pontificum, and how it opened up the freedom for priests to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass when it was requested by the faithful, that we saw that happen here in the Diocese of Spokane. There are several priests who do exactly what you mentioned. They have the Novus Ordo Mass, right? The Mass everyone typically is accustomed to, with the priest facing the people in English. And then they'll have one Mass a week on Sunday. That's the traditional Latin Mass, the extraordinary form. And you know what? It has been a wonderful source of renewal and revival of faith, and I want to call it sustaining faith and recovering faith for many families. It's funny because I think, Janet, you and I, we both had a commitment to wanting to foster the faith of Catholics in the reception of Holy Communion and of the worship of the Lord at Mass. Before we discovered and sort of made more of a commitment to seek out and to worship in the traditional Latin Mass. So when I think about when Pope Benedict's document came out about 13 years ago, it didn't really mean a lot to me. I was like, oh, that'll be helpful for some, sliver of folks that for whom that's their thing, right? But all I can say is in the last couple of years, the awakening of faith that has happened, the deepening of faith, the recovery and practice of worship of the Lord at the traditional Latin Mass has done so many wonders for my family that it's like, why did I not appreciate this before? And thank God that I'm appreciating it now. But boy, I don't feel like I fit any of those boxes that are being checked seemingly against those who attend the traditional Latin Mass. Narrow, judgmental, harsh, hypocritical of Pope Francis, denying of the Second Vatican Council, right? All of these things. I'm like, wait a minute. That's not me. That's not my family. That's not the family in front of me at Mass. That's not the family behind me at Mass. In fact, I'm trying to think of the families that are at Mass there, and so many of them are like me, sort of late discoverers of the traditional Latin Mass and how it is so very refreshing and life-giving.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think there are people that fit that description that you gave that you're not, but they are minuscule. And since the Benedict's opening it up, the traditional Latin Mass has just been overtaken by these new young families, and they have none of this attitude, none of it. And you want to say, 14 years is a very short period of time in the history of the Church. And I would say, if to look at it, I just wrote a column for the National Catholic Register, pleading to the U.S. bishops, a surprising number of whom, and I think the majority of whom to this point, are saying, keep going. Just the status quo is in place until we study study matters. And I'm going to say, Pope Francis said that he did a consultation with the bishops of the world, and through it discovered this problem of divisiveness, and has therefore decided to, not just for a temporary period of time, but he wants to basically eliminate the traditional Latin Mass. It's not a punishment that's for a short period of time. It's depriving it of everybody, everywhere, at all times in the future, because there's some people now who are reportedly divisive. Well, I want to say to the bishops of the world, please do your own study of your own diocese and talk to the priests who offer the Mass in parishes. And I think you will find that they have found it to be an overwhelmingly positive development in their churches. Again, as you said, I mean, I just am stunned every week just sitting there watching, family with 3 kids, 5 kids, 7 kids, 2 kids. All I see are big families. That's all I see. And young families with only a few kids, but on their way too many. But I was thinking there does seem to be a cross-pollination between the Novus Ordo and the TLM that's been very salutary. The Novus Ordo has gained much greater dignity in the last couple of years. There are priests who celebrate the Novus Ordo ad orientem. They put up a communion rails. People receive communion on the tongue. They put more Latin in the Mass. All to the good. All to the good.
Yeah.
Well, let me just finish.
Go ahead,
yeah,
please.
go ahead. No, just you can go ahead because I just want to come back. My problem is I forget. So let me just continue with just a little bit that at our traditional Latin Mass, people sing with gusto. They sing the Gloria, the Credo. All right, they sing the Sanctus, they sing the Agnus Dei, they say the Non Sub Dignus. Of course, we all chime in every time there's an Et cum spiritu tuo. I think it would be appropriate for us to sing or say the Confiteor. I think it would be appropriate for us to sing the Pater Noster. Right, and I think it's because of our experience of the Novus Ordo, we've been accustomed now to singing or saying these prayers in the liturgy. Most of the quiet in the TLM that I go to is when the canon starts. And it's just after you leave the first part of the Mass, then there's all this silence that descends upon the church. There might be the choir doing a chant, but it's also contemplative. It's also peaceful. And so you have this, I do think sort of this idea of some participation, active participation has come into the TLM, which is what Vatican II wanted. But it still retains its character of a Mass that is so quiet and so reverential. So I want to say, if you look at it, there's been some very healthy cross-pollination between the two forms of. I'm not convinced at all it's the same two forms, but that's how the Church speaks of it. Two forms of the liturgy, and it's been positive. I was just talking to a friend who's been a TLM person forever, but she says it's been so healthy since Benedict's statement that Novus Ordo people now don't look at us as a threat. They say, oh yeah, this is a very legitimate liturgy, and if I want to come, I can. I don't feel like I'm sneaking around or being disobedient. And I see people in the Novus Ordo that are very happy sometimes going to the TLM. So I don't find that a threat anymore. And of course the TLM people say, yeah, we're in the parish now. We don't have to go to a gym. We're in a parish now. We feel welcome. We don't feel like we're marginalized and we're some sort of freaks because we like the Mass, what I love to call the Mass of the Ages.
Well, and Janet, here's the interesting thing. So here I am in the state of Washington, right? Not known as a bastion of conservatism, and yet you have in the Archdiocese of Seattle 2 FSSP parishes, and they are both full and flourishing. And so thanks be to God for Archbishop Aitchen and his willingness to allow them to be there and to continue to operate in their ministry. And so I just want to encourage Catholics that appreciate the traditional Latin Mass in the Archdiocese of Seattle. If you have been touched by the ministry of the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, please contact the bishop's office. Make a phone call, ask for an email address, write a letter to thank the Archbishop for that permission and for the continuance of that ministry in the Archdiocese of Seattle. Out here in Spokane, you have Bishop Daly, who has welcomed the Sacred Liturgy Conference for more than 1 year, where there has been, maybe the most significant single conference that happens on an annual basis to help promote and foster an appreciation and a spread of the traditional Latin Mass. And recently, he also welcomed into the Diocese of Spokane a new religious community that celebrates the traditional Latin Mass. That's right here in Spokane, and then just across and so again, folks, if you appreciate the fact that he gives permission to, the Father Gaines and the Father Tuckerman and the other priests in the diocese here that are celebrating the traditional Latin Mass with his support and approval, write to Bishop Daly, call up the diocesan office, ask for an email address, let him know how much you appreciate that he permits his diocesan priests to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, and that he supports the traditional Latin Mass in these variety of ways. And then just one last thing, folks, if you're listening in Idaho, or if you go to St. Joan of Arc in Post Falls, that's part of the Diocese of Boise, and Bishop Christensen, he's down in Boise, way far away. You write him a letter and you let him know just how appreciative you are that the priestly fraternity has been permitted to operate and to have a parish here that is growing in ways that are just almost unfathomable. People moving here from across the country on a weekly basis is just really stunning. So thank Bishop Christensen for his support for the traditional Latin Mass happening in the Diocese of Boise. There's something that you can do to say, okay, this document has come out. That doesn't mean that even anything has to change for your diocese, for your parishes where this is happening. So that's just an encouragement, Janet.
Well, I think that's very important. I think that some people evidently a few bishops are under the impression that they needed to stop the Latin Mass on Saturday. It was done, over, in their diocese. As I said, most of the statements I've seen from the bishops in the U.S. are not taking that stand. And I think it's Canon 87 that says that a bishop can, permit any liturgy in his diocese if he believes it's necessary for the well-being of and the faith, fostering the faith of his people. And it wouldn't be being disobedient to the Motu Proprio, which also reiterates that it's the local bishop's decision about what liturgies are to be said in his diocese. And one of the most disturbing things is that the Motu Proprio says that it's not to be said in a parish church, or that no personal parishes are to be set up. And you want to say, there's nothing I find more wonderful than going to Latin Mass at my own parish. This has been my parish. And I go with the people who are my friends, and some of them have discovered the Latin Mass. They never knew about it until it showed up at our parish. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be shunted off to some place as if we're, people are using the term, sort of lepers. You can't mix with us. We're too weird. We're too strange.
Well, Jill, let me ask about that, because I didn't read the document like that. Maybe I didn't read the right commentaries, but my sense was that what the Pope was saying was, you can't start, let's open up a new parish over here, Saint Elizabeth, and that parish will be the traditional Latin Mass parish. So they won't establish a parish with that as the intent, but that if a diocesan parish is to continue having the traditional Latin Mass, it's that the priest who is presiding needs to come back to the bishop first, get permission, and then it can continue as normal. Is that the way it was? I thought that's what it said.
I don't think so. I'm at my computer and I might be able to pull it up, but I think it says it cannot be held in parochial churches, and no personal parishes can be Established. Thank you. Established. Exactly.
So that part I think I got. It's really that first part that was like, that's kind of new to me. And I thought that had to do with the fact that you can't just default and say this is on the Mass schedule, but rather the priests who are celebrating it just had to go back to the bishop to get permission. That's how I read it.
Yeah, well, I would hope you're right. I'm afraid I don't think you are, but it'd be nice if you were. But someone said, a couple other people have said that. Most people read it the way that I just said it, but if it's the way that you interpret it, all the better. But I think he means not to have it in parish churches.
Well, and so this is an attempt to bring about a certain good, and so my understanding is that the goods that are attempted to be achieved here are an overcoming of division, rather than in a fostering of unity, and that somehow that unity was connected to the negative attitudes, the judgmentalism, the overly harsh or narrow or rigid spirit that seemed to emanate from those who also, at least on social media platforms, were very strong proponents of the traditional Latin Mass. That's sort of my summary of it, which just strikes me as, yeah, I guess I could identify 2 or 3 people that come across with that spirit, but please, just if you think that that's the case, come to St. Joan of Arc in Post Falls, Idaho, and you'll be completely disabused of that idea. It's just like, so not that.
No, I agree with that. So, as you know, if you look at social media, there's certainly strains of it that would confirm what he says he found. People are angry. They're hurt. As I said, if someone, puts a knife in your heart, you're going to scream. And you might not scream the nicest possible things. And that's what's happening here. People are, they're frightened, they're grieving, they're hurt. Not everybody's behaving as well as they should. But to think that any kind of that attitude deserves not having access to the Mass of the Ages, the traditional Latin Mass, just doesn't make sense. You just don't take away the very thing that gives us graces, and you don't take it away from everyone to punish a few. And that's what doesn't make sense. And as we all know, as I stated earlier, the abuses of the Novus Ordo for the last 50 years have just been egregious. And I mean, there's studies that have been done, and like 98% of those who go to the traditional Latin Mass accept all the teachings of the Church. And you look at the Novus Ordo, and if you're lucky, it's 50% on any given topic. So
you have to say that again, because it's just, that's something that I'm like, are we really, really, really aware of that? Like, if you took a simple survey at St. Joan of Arc and that said, do you believe the Church's teaching on contraception? And are you practicing fertility awareness or natural family planning in your married life? The answer would be, of course I believe it. Like 98% believe it, and 98% are living it. It would be my guess. And then do you believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist? Do you attend Mass every Sunday? Right? Are you attempting to foster faith in your home in intentional ways? The numbers would be extraordinarily high. It's like what I say is, you don't just stumble into the traditional Latin Mass. It's a choice. It's a decision, because it changes your lifestyle. It changes like how you show up at Mass, how you're dressed, when you're there, how you're present at Mass, what happens when you're done with Mass, how about going to confession in relationship to Mass. Like, all of these things change because of, literally, you're in the presence of the traditional Latin Mass, and what does it call forth from you?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, there was an article in the National Catholic Register by a priest who did a survey of like 1,500 people in his own the traditional Latin Mass, of all these questions that you just did. Do you go to Mass? Do you believe this? Contraception, abortion, homosexuality? And then he contrasted that with the beliefs of the Novus Ordo people that were studied by Pew, one of the best research institutes there is. And it was overwhelming. I mean, the TLM people, I said around 98% accepted every teaching of the Church. On the other ones, anywhere from like 30% on the real presence, up to 81% dissented, or 87%, I think, dissented on contraception. It's as you would say, it's absolutely striking, the difference between the two.
Right? So, Janet, it's just so interesting, like, the attitudes that my kids had about going to Mass, where we would be strong about, you dress, like, our principle is you dress for a wedding, right? So that's how you dress when you go to Sunday Mass. Well, when we were going to the Novus Ordo Mass, the typical expression, the contrast was that the spirit among the people, the attitude was that it was a very casual act. And we were attempting to foster throughout our entire lives, raising our kids, that this is a holy act deserving of reverence on our part. And the challenge was that increasingly we stood out as like extreme. That was what our kids said. Well, why are we so extreme compared to everyone else around us? And to be fair, it wasn't everyone. It just felt like everyone. Because we're there as one of the few large families at the parish that was casually celebrating the Mass, and we could have a whole long talk about what does casual look like. People chit-chatting before Mass, their manner of dress, what time do they actually arrive at Mass, what happens immediately after Mass for people chatting in church, the teaching or instruction around who should come forward to receive Holy Communion and how communion was received. All of these things just came across as very casual, and casual is I'll tell you what, that's actually a higher level. I think a lot of my kids would have said, Dad, and they've said this to me, Dad, the priest is more bored than we are, because of the perfunctory, just sort of matter-of-fact way that the priest just sort of went through the prayers. Like, do you really mean what you're saying here? So, and that's sad, but unfortunately that's not like shockingly rare. That's more sort of par for the course for many Catholics' experiences of the Novus Ordo Mass. And so then when you shift over, and now my kids know that we have to arrive at Mass 15 minutes early, and actually we get there a half an hour early, for those kids. We go in 2 cars. We go a half an hour early for those kids that are going to confession before Mass, and then 15 minutes early just to make sure we get a seat. And no one even questions how to dress. All the girls are in modest dresses. All the boys are dressed in shirt and tie or suit and tie. And the girls are all veiled now or wear classy hats. And they know that there is an expectation of holy. Like, I never saw my kids not go forward to communion before. But when they hear at every single Mass, communion is for those who aren't conscious of an unconfessed mortal sin. And so if you are in that state, go to confession before you come forward to Holy Communion, and by a practicing Catholic, right? And so I've actually had my kids like stay behind in the pew and not come forward for Holy Communion. Like, that's a stunner. And then after Mass, nobody moves. We all fall and kneel and we pray a prayer of thanksgiving after Mass that lasts at least a minute, if not 5 minutes, depending on the kid. And this is just the new habit. It's a habit of reverence rather than a habit that's casual. And look at the difference it makes in my kids' spiritual well-being. Like, how is this not a good thing?
No, it's an amazing thing you just said. I'm one of those that, I sit up front because I'm short and I have to see, and I can only hear if I'm close enough. And the one advantage to that is that I get to observe the altar boys closely, which I find to be one of the most edifying portions of the whole Mass. I mean, you get to, I think our probably youngest is probably 5. And then it goes up to, college boys, and they're all so disappointed, and they're just so focused on everything. You rarely see them. Even this time, the first time I saw one little boy that share a little laugh with another boy, and they were just trying so hard not to laugh, because they knew it wasn't right. But just the way that they look at the priest, the way that they look at each other, the way they make certain that they're lined up just right. And their parents tell me, these kids are fighting to serve. They've got many more boys to serve than they can handle. And so the minute they get called, they go. And if there's a Mass that's an early morning Mass, those kids, they say they get up for nothing except for early morning TLN Mass. And they're ready to go and ready to do their job. Oh my gosh, your kid said the priest seems as bored as we are. I mean, that's an incredible statement. And just contrasting it with these young altar boys that are, it just warms my heart beyond words to see the reverence with which they serve the Mass. And of course, they all want to proceed up the ranks. They all want to be the master of ceremony someday. And you can just see they're doing their best to learn it. Now, Tom, I did find that I did go on and get the document, and it really does say it can't be done in parish churches. This is what it says. It says the bishop is to designate one or more locations where the faithful adherents of these groups may gather for the Eucharistic celebrations, not, however, in the parochial churches and without the erection of new personal parishes. So he's to designate one or more locations where they can gather, but not in parochial churches. And then it says, this is even, I haven't seen people talk about this because I think that one takes their breath away. The next one says to establish at the designated locations the days on which Eucharistic celebrations are permitted. So it doesn't even assume there's going to be a regular Sunday Mass. And it just, you have to ask, it's amazing to me. At our parish, the priest now is doing any kind of special feast. He'll say, this feast, the precious blood is on this evening, so we're going to do a Latin Mass at 7:30. And then I say, okay, there's another special feast coming up. We're going to do, so we're here on Sunday that these new, we're going to have, and they're all very well attended. It's not packed, but very well attended. But all that's being taken away. What a couple friends have said to me, they say, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Why are they doing this? Then I'll say, it doesn't make sense. And this is going to sound terribly cynical and critical, but I think it's logical. it doesn't make sense if your purpose is to increase the number of very faithful people in the church and to feed and nurture the souls of those who are totally committed to the teaching of the church. Then it doesn't make any sense. If your purpose is to change the teaching of the church and to break with tradition, it makes a lot of sense, right? So it's like people are so mystified, and I say that's because you're assuming that and you hate that to question motivations, and probably people are going to say it's so wrong, but the evidence has been pretty overwhelming that there are those in the hierarchy that want to build a new church, and they want to get rid of the old church and have a new church in which the old morality, that we accept LGBTQ people, not just accept them as our brothers and sisters in the Lord, which we do, of course, we love them, but we accept and bless their lifestyles. It's totally different, right? We allow the divorced and remarried without benefit annulment to go to communion. In fact, maybe we'll just put up communion to everybody. We don't withhold communion from politicians that are very manifestly advancing such horrific things as abortion. That's a different church. That's a new church. And if you get people saying, well, we are a new church, we have a new mass, we don't even allow the old mass. Well, you say, okay, join the new church. The old church is gone. And I think that's what's happening here.
The reality is that you have an ever-increasing number of fervent, intentional Catholic families who have found a powerful home in the traditional Latin Mass. A lot of these folks are at diocesan parishes, and if those priests are not permitted to somehow continue to celebrate in those parishes, I am wondering if we're going to get a huge influx over at St. Joan, where, it's full already. So it's going to be, I don't know what's going to happen there. And then sadly, there'll be people who go to the SSPX. So you talk about kind of increasing a sense of disunity and divisiveness. It's just going to create a larger chasm between Catholics who long to continue to nurture their family and faith and what they're no longer able to easily access.
Well, as I said, if we're not allowed to worship anymore in our parish churches using the TLM, again, it turns us into some sort of pariahs, and that we're or lepers. You can't come in here. You're not allowed here. This is not your church. This is the church of the new church, not the old church. And we're just going to let you do that until you die away. And we're not going to allow new priests to do it. They have to have special permission. And again, I've never been a cynical person, but I'm thinking this young priest has to go to his bishop and say, or I want to learn the traditional Latin Mass. And then he said, well, I have to consult with Rome. And if it just seems to me you're just asking priests to sort of out themselves. It's like, all right, I'm going to tell you who are the conservatives around here, so we can get rid of them. And
right, and put a really huge obstacle in the way. Talk about I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm saying we're going to put a huge obstacle in your way that is going to make you visible and maybe put you in a light that you may not want to be in. So now, what do you want me to do? Right, so that would be a sad outcome.
It would be a sad, and I think it's even going to be a sadder outcome. The reports are that the seminarians are very interested in the traditional Latin Mass. The Sacred Heart Mary Seminary has been teaching those who want to learn it for some time. And believe me, I don't think they would be doing that, except that the bishops want them to do that. The seminaries don't do anything the bishops don't want, especially something as radical as teaching men how to say the traditional Latin Mass. And they're doing it because, I think, for many reasons. It seems to me they have discovered the reverence there, and it just blows them away. I think they don't buy the statement that I've been taught, has been just pushed at me for decades, is that Young people like this new music. Young people like this contemporary music in the Mass. Well, and now they're saying old people like this music. It's the music that they've had their whole life. The old people have to have this music at Mass. And I want to say, I was a young person. I am an old person. I have never liked it, but nobody's ever asked me. Nobody's ever asked me. So how do we know that? So I think these young men are saying, no, my generation, the young generation, is drawn to this Latin Mass. I mean, I always said, why? How do you know the young don't like the Latin Mass? They've never experienced it. And now that they're experienced it, they're flocking to it. And so you want to say, I feel a bit vindicated here for those who have told me that young people like the guitar masses. I'm saying I'm not getting that sense. I do think the old people do. I'm one of the oldest people at the Mass I go to. All the old people go to Novus Ordo. The young people are at the traditional Latin Mass. And I think they know their people want it. And so when they become ordained, they want this to be one of the things that they can offer. And they're not saying we're not going to say the Novus Ordo. They're at a seminary where the Novus Ordo is the norm. They're not rejecting it in the least, but they're wanting to give the fullness of the options to the faithful that exist. So to think that we're going to be shuffled off to gymnasiums now because somehow this is this is forbidden stuff that they're going to just sort of tolerate until we die off. Well, I want to say the young people, it's going to take them a long time to die off. And of course, what Francis has done is that he's made it clear that he can. Some people have said, I mean, this is the most confrontational to a previous pope document that's ever been written. That just very clearly says, I am overturning what John Paul II, Saint John Paul II, and the living Pope Emeritus, Pope Benedict, permitted. I am overturning what they did. That's a remarkable thing. The hope that it gives us, I hate to say it, is that some pope in the future will peel this back. But is this what we're going to have? It's sort of like, okay, in this pontificate, this is the TLM is allowed. In the next pontificate, it's not allowed. The next one is allowed. Does that make any sense? I mean, Benedict corrected an error. It was an egregious error. How many people left the church in 1970 when Paul VI said, a lot of young people don't know this, but I mean, again, we have this Mass that everybody everywhere has gone to through all time. It's developed organically. It's a beautiful thing. You can go to the same Mass in Japan and Chicago. It's the same Mass. You can go to South Africa. It's the same Mass. We're a united church, all right? And then along comes the Novus Ordo, written by Bonini, all right, a Mason, not consistent with the requirements of Vatican II. I mean, when they say that the TLM people reject Vatican II, I want to say the Novus Ordo people that don't give a prominence of place to Latin are rejecting Vatican II, because that's what Vatican II says. It says the liturgy should continue to give primacy of place to Latin, all right? So who's breaking? Well, that Novus Ordo broke, right? And in order to enforce it on people, Paul VI said it couldn't be said anymore. The traditional Latin Mass couldn't be said anymore, except to some old priests who couldn't be expected to adjust. And then there was a bizarre one where who was it? Dorothy Sayers, I think, in England, wrote a letter. I think she was the one, wrote a letter saying that all these artists and people of refinement couldn't live without the traditional Latin Mass, but they'd be allowed to say it. And Paul VI said yes. Oh my God. So anyway, so it was stopped, and a lot of people left the church. Now, I have members of my own family, cousins and brothers, who left the church, and every once in a while they'll come back. They'll come to a Latin Mass with me, and the first thing they say leaving the Mass is, the church left me. I didn't leave the church. That's the Mass I grew up with. The Mass that I've seen it since then is not the Mass I know. And there is that sense the church left these people. They didn't leave the church. They were going to Mass every Sunday. They were there doing their devotions and everything. And all of a sudden, this Mass that the hymns they don't recognize, guitars, as you said, casual dress, priests just all over the altar without any dignity of demeanor or walking or anything. And you're saying they're saying I don't feel like, because I've been saying recently that if the way in which people have tweaked the Novus Ordo in accordance with what the Church wants it to be, I mean, making it a very reverential occasion. And especially if the whole thing is said in Latin. The Novus Ordo in Latin is a beautiful Mass. It's not the same as a traditional Latin Mass. It doesn't have the same prayers, but a lot of the dignity of the traditional Mass is transferred over to the Novus Ordo. If you go to the Novus Ordo in Latin, or you go to the Novus Ordo that's said in a very reverent way, ad orientem, etc., they seem much closer to each other than a lot of the Novus Ordo Masses seem to each other. You go to a Novus Ordo Mass in one parish 1 week and go another one the next week. Say, this doesn't seem like the same Mass at all. The difference between the way the priest says it is just extraordinary. So,
I'm talking to Janet Smith here on the program, and she's sharing some of her thoughts and reflections about this recent document by Pope Francis that is turning back, it's abrogating some of the permissions that Pope Benedict released as it relates to the traditional Latin Mass and the freedom that priests have to worship, to celebrate Mass in their parishes. And we'll see how these implications are going to continue to unfold. You know, one of the ways that I think about the shift that's happened in my life, and it's somewhat related to the Novus Ordo Mass versus the traditional Latin Mass, is that in my efforts to evangelize, I was always taught and even promoted the idea that without losing our identity, we ought to seek to be relevant. So that was the hinge, is that relevance would be meaningful, would be attractive, would make connections with the people of today. But you have to do it in a way that doesn't betray your own identity. So that was the tension. And I think in some ways that you see get played out in the Novus Ordo, in the new Mass, with the music, with the style of liturgy, with the personality of the priest, with the environment in which the Church is offering the Mass, the sacred liturgy. And what I realized is that the real hinge isn't the relationship between identity and relevance, but identity and reverence. That if you live your identity well in the sacred liturgy, there's a necessary overflow in reverent expressions. And believe it or not, as countercultural, as seemingly discordant as it seems, that is magnetic. That will draw people and keep people, young people, more than the relevant identity dynamic. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yes, I think, I mean, as our culture just completely careens out of control, careens out of control, that there is no such thing as reverence for the truth, respect for the truth. There's no attempt to be consistent or fair or anything. People have power, use it to advance their own agendas without any concern for fair play, justice, the law, or anything. It's a unbelievably confusing world. I don't know, my 1968 when I graduated from college was plenty confusing, but not remotely like it is today. And I just feel for these young people who are growing up in a world in which you're told that you're homophobic if you refuse to allow biological men to participate in women's sports. If that's, and that abortion is allowed, et cetera, we allow old people to die in nursing homes because of COVID alone. Any one of these people would rather die in the arms of their loved ones and live another 15 minutes in order to die alone. I mean, it's one of the greatest tragedies of our time that we thought somehow it made sense to allow I don't know, New York State, 15,000, I don't know how many thousand people to die alone of COVID in nursing homes. So kids see this, and they say, I don't want that relevance brought into my church. I want a place where there is stability, where there is truth, where there is beauty, where there is goodness, all right? And that's what they find in the traditional Latin Mass. These young people bringing their children there, they know they are in a hostile world. They are in a world that is hostile to everything that they want to teach their kids. And they need the support. They need the support of the liturgy. They need the support of the other people that go to the liturgy. They are building incredibly strong communities because they're not going to be able to depend at all on the culture. My parents, they raised us in a culture that was largely sympathetic to their values. Virtually everybody up and down the street and the small town I grew up in, we all believed the same things. We believed in so-called family values, fidelity of husbands to wife, going to church on Sunday, no lying, no cheating, no stealing, no pornography. It was pretty basic stuff, and everybody agreed. And now you don't. And I mean, people are now. I'm having trouble keeping some friends who are mad at me because I haven't gotten vaccinated. They basically don't want to talk to me anymore. They think I'm completely irrational. I don't feel that way about them. I understand why they made their decision. I didn't make that decision, but I don't think it's a reason to sever a relationship and a friendship. But that's what these young people are dealing with. Things are just crazy. They're insane. So it's to try to make the church relevant. It would mean to be relativistic, subjectivistic, lying, cheating, stealing, etc. Whereas the church is meant to be. I mean, this whole notion. Again, I call the Mass the traditional Latin Mass and the Mass of the ages because one of the reasons we're Catholics is that we believe this church goes all the way back to Christ. All right. And we want to be in that church. We want to be in that church that has an unbroken succession of apostolic leaders that go back to Christ. And we want the teachings that are established by the church throughout the ages. Again, independent of the insanity of our times. And then
and Janet, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off
sure,
there. Believe it or not,
course.
You've been extremely generous with your time, and you've actually... We are now out of time, but this has been an incredibly fascinating, and I'm actually really confident, very helpful conversation for folks listening today who are wondering, how do I make sense of this? Folks, I do want to encourage you, if you're on Facebook, go to Janet E. Smith. Go to her page. You can follow her. She is so good. Janet, you do such a service on Facebook to post articles and then to try to help at least foster a kind of dialogue and be reasonable about it. So you really do a wonderful job of that. And that was really the impetus for me to reach out to say, you know what, Janet, I need your voice to help sort of calm the storm out here a little bit and also give some encouragement and some guidance. And you did that today very well. Thank you, Janet.
Well, thank you, Tom, for giving me a forum and just letting me rant. I actually got a sweet note from a bishop today. You will know who it is. Bishop Strickland just wrote me a note, and he said, I suspect you're feeling really hurt. Do you want to call and talk to me? Like, what? Who does that? And he said, you can rant and rave if you want to. But see, now my friend Tom has given me that opportunity. So I don't have to bend a good bishop's ear. So I thank you.
I'll send you a recording of this, and then you can just say, Bishop Strickland, listen to this, and then give me a call if you want.
Yeah, I'll post it too for sure. You send me the link. God bless you.
I'll totally do that. Janet, thank you so much for your time today.
You are welcome, Tom. Thank you.